The wind howled through the skeletal remains of the canyon town, carrying the smell of smoke, gust, and something fouler beneath it: fear. "I'm dirty," the young woman said, her voice trembling, roughened by days spent crawling through the desert, hiding from men who had no mercy. She huddled beneath a tattered blanket outside the crumbling remains of a blackened saloon, her dark hair plastered to her sweat-streaked face. The warrior stepped closer, his boots crunching over broken glass and parched earth, his eyes narrowing beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Every muscle in his bronzed, scarred frame tensed like a coiled rope. He knew the danger was not past. It was waiting. The warrior, a native man named Cale, moved with a quiet authority, one hand brushing the handle of his revolver while the other reached for the blanket. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, his voice low, resonant, yet strangely gentle. As the fabric lifted, the dim sunlight caught the jagged tear in her dress, the mud streaking her legs, the bruises blooming like dark flowers across her skin. Cale's jaw tightened. In his 30 years of guarding the lawless expanses, he had seen every cruelty the Old West could breed, yet something in her gaze, raw and unyielding, struck a chord he had long buried. I escaped," she stammered, teeth chattering from cold and fear. They said I wouldn't make it out alive." Her hands, trembling like leaves in a storm, clutched the blanket closer around her body. Cale's piercing eyes swept the horizon. The canyon cliffs were silent now, but he sensed movement, footprints in the dust leading from the north ridge. Predators. Men who took what they wanted without question. Cale knelt beside her, careful not to startle her further. "You're safe, for now," he murmured. His voice carried the warmth of a hearth in a windswept desert. The woman shivered violently. Cale's own hands were rough and calloused, yet he placed them lightly on her shoulders, steadying her. "We need shelter. There's an abandoned homestead not far from here. You can hide there, rest, and recover." Her dark eyes flicked up, glistening with unshed tears. "Why would you help me?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Nobody helps anyone out here, not anymore." Cale's gaze softened, though the tension in his shoulders remained. "Because some things are worth saving," he said. And in that moment, as the sun dipped below jagged rock formations, casting the canyon in molten gold and shadow, a fragile trust began to form between them, a fragile lifeline in a land where every gust of wind could carry death. They rose together, the woman leaning heavily on Cale as he guided her across the sun-baked earth. The wind bit at their faces, whipping dust into their eyes, making the journey treacherous. Yet, with every careful step toward the homestead, the sense of stakes grew heavier, not just for her, but for him. A warrior may fight many battles, but this one was personal. The old wooden door of the homestead creaked as they pushed it open, revealing darkness that smelled of rot and old smoke. Cale stepped inside first, gun raised, eyes scanning the shadows. She followed, her hands clinging to the blanket, heart hammering like the hooves of a charging horse. Somewhere beyond the walls, danger waited. And though they did not yet know it, the events that would unfold over the next 7 days would change both their lives and the fate of the small canyon town forever. The homestead smelled of dust, rot, and old wood, but it was safer than the canyon floor outside. Cale lowered the blanket-wrapped woman onto a threadbare cot pushed against a wall, its springs groaning under her weight. The fading light from the broken windows painted the room in streaks of amber and shadow, illuminating years of abandonment. Cracked floorboards, cobwebbed corners, and the remnants of furniture left to decay. Each creak of the old building echoed like a warning, reminding them that danger could be just beyond the threshold. "Stay here," Cale whispered, his deep voice steady yet urgent. He pulled his revolver from the worn leather holster, the weight comforting in his hands. I'll check the perimeter. Don't move unless I tell you." The woman nodded, her fingers clutching the blanket so tightly her knuckles turned white. She tried to speak, but no words came out. The desert, the men chasing her, the terror, it all seemed to have stolen her voice. Cale understood. He had seen fear like this before, and he had learned that patience, not force, could coax courage from the broken. Outside, the wind had shifted, carrying with it the faint crunch of boots over dust and gravel. Cale's muscles tensed, his eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his hat. He moved silently, like a predator who knew every shadow, every stone, every whisper of the wind. He circled the homestead, scanning the horizon, noting footprints leading up to the broken fence and then fading into the scrub brush. Too deliberate, too heavy, they weren't casual travelers. These were men used to hunting people like her. Back inside, the woman pressed her cheek against the cot, trying to catch her breath. Every creak of the house, every gust rattling the shutters, made her flinch. She thought she saw movement in the shadows, but the dim light played tricks. Still, she did not scream. Somehow, she trusted him, this stranger who had appeared like a force of nature, his very presence a shield against the violence that lurked just outside. Cale returned, boots silent against the floorboards. He removed his hat, wiping sweat and dust from his brow, and knelt beside her. "They're close," he said softly. "We don't have much time. We need to fortify this place." Her eyes widened. "Fortify?" she whispered. Her voice was barely audible, hoarse from days without water or food. Cale's gaze swept the room. "We'll use what we have. Bar the door. Pile furniture against the windows. Anything to slow them down." He moved with precise efficiency, dragging a splintered dresser to block the main entrance, stacking chairs and crates against the window frames. The woman followed his lead, her trembling hands moving furniture as he instructed. Each piece they placed became a small act of defiance, a stake in their tiny claim to survival. As night fell, the wind outside rose into a howl, carrying distant shouts and the metallic clink of weapons. Cale's eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the darkness outside every crack and broken shutter. His body was tense, coiled like a spring, every nerve on alert. The woman sat against the wall, shivering, listening to the sounds that spelled death if they failed. Cale handed her a tin cup of water, its surface reflecting the dim candlelight. "Drink slowly," he advised. "Strength isn't just in your arms. It's in your mind, your body, your will." She drank, tiny sips, letting the cool water soothe her cracked lips and parched throat. For a moment, her eyes met Cale's, and she saw in him something she hadn't dared hope for, a steady, unwavering determination that told her they might survive this night. And perhaps more than that, she sensed he would not let her suffering go unnoticed, not when she had escaped fate's cruel hand only to tumble into his care. The hours passed slowly. Each sound outside made her flinch. Each gust of wind against the broken walls made her grip the blanket tighter. Cale remained vigilant, his ears attuned to the slightest shift in the shadows. They were not safe yet, not by far. But in the small glow of the candlelight, in the fragile sense of trust building between them, there was a glimmer of hope, a promise that even in the merciless expanse of the Old West, courage and compassion could endure. And as the moon rose, high above the canyon, casting silver light over the desolate town, Cale knew one truth. The night ahead would test them both in ways neither had imagined, and survival would demand more than strength. It would demand sacrifice. The night was thick with tension. Outside, the wind carried whispers of movement, shuffling feet over dirt, the low murmur of men speaking in clipped tones. Cale's sharp eyes pierced the shadows beyond the broken windows, every muscle coiled, ready for action. The woman pressed herself closer to the cot, trembling. the blanket a thin barrier against the cold and against the fear that had followed her from the canyon. Cale motioned for her to stay low. "They're moving faster then." "I expected," he muttered under his breath, lips barely moving. His voice was calm, deliberate, but the edge of urgency sliced through it. "We might have only one chance to defend ourselves before they break through." The woman's heart pounded. She wanted to ask questions, why he cared, who he was, why he even helped her, but her voice had not returned. All she could do was watch wide-eyed as he moved through the room, barricading more furniture against the windows. His hands, scarred and strong, worked with precision, each motion measured, almost ritualistic. There was a confidence in him that belied the mortal danger approaching, a confidence forged in the unforgiving deserts and canyons of the West, a lifetime of facing death and cruelty and surviving. A shadow moved across the cracked doorway. Cale froze, barely breathing, and the woman felt the sudden electric tension of the moment. He stepped forward silently, revolver drawn, and the figure halted in the moonlight. One intruder. Cale's hand did not shake. His eyes, dark and unyielding, scanned the figure, a man lean, dirty, armed, his own eyes filled with menace. "Who's there?" Cale demanded, his voice low but cutting through the silence. The man hesitated, a smirk curling across his bloodied face. "Just passing through," he said, though the tension in his posture betrayed the lie. His hand twitched near his gun, but Cale's gaze pinned him, immovable. Cale's stance shifted, muscles coiling like springs. "You move, and it'll be your last mistake," he warned. His voice carried the weight of a lifetime spent defending. What mattered? The intruder's smirk faltered. He knew, instinctively, that this was no ordinary man standing before him. Inside, the woman could barely breathe. She had seen men like this before, merciless, cruel, but something about Cale gave her a spark of hope. Even in her fear, even with the shadows pressing in, she clung to it. The intruder finally backed away, melting into the darkness. Cale's eyes did not leave the black void outside the windows. "More are coming," he said quietly, though it was more a statement of fact than a warning. "We have to be ready." Hours stretched on. The night deepened, the wind howled, and every creak of the old homestead sounded like a drumbeat of impending doom. Cale remained vigilant, listening to every rustle of leaves, every distant step on the dirt outside. Occasionally, he glanced at the woman, ensuring she was still with him, still alive. She sat huddled on the cot, blanket pulled up to her chin, eyes wide but steadily fixing on him. For the first time in days, she felt a measure of safety, not because the danger had vanished, but because she trusted him to face it. Cale finally spoke, voice quiet and steady. "Tell me your name," he said. "It helps me know who I'm protecting." The woman hesitated. She had never been asked such a question in weeks. The wind outside carried a shuddering howl, like the canyon itself was warning them. "Lila," she whispered, barely audible. "Lila," Cale repeated, letting her name roll off his tongue like a promise. "We survived tonight. I'll make sure of it." He moved to a shadowed corner, pulling out a small, weathered knife. With meticulous care, he prepared a series of makeshift traps at the weak points of the homestead, nails loosened from the floor, a tripwire here, a noise-making setup there. Each action was precise, calculated, born of experience and necessity. He had learned to turn fear into advantage, danger into a weapon. As the first pale hints of dawn brushed the horizon, the wind carried distant voices again. More men, but Cale was ready. And for Lila, though she could not yet speak, hope took root, a fragile, flickering light in the heart of the desert night, fed by the presence of a warrior who refused to let the world's cruelty claim her. Day would bring its own trials, but for now, Cale and Lila waited, silent, determined. together. The first gray streaks of dawn crept over the canyon cliffs, casting a cold light through the broken windows of the homestead. Outside, the wind carried distant shouts, the low murmur of men moving deliberately toward their target. Cale crouched beside the barricaded door, his revolver at the ready, every sense tuned to the faintest sound. Lila stayed low on the cot, blanket pulled tightly around her, eyes wide and fearful but quietly trusting the man who had saved her life. Cale's hand rested on the edge of the doorframe, feeling the vibrations of approaching footsteps. He could see shadows moving among the dust and rocks outside. These were not casual hunters. These were men who thrived on cruelty, who took what they wanted with no regard for mercy. And now they had found Lila. They're coming closer. Cale murmured, voice calm but low. He turned to Lila. Listen to me. When they break in, stay down, stay quiet. Follow my lead and we'll get through this. Lila nodded, gripping the blanket so tightly her fingers went white. Her fear did not vanish, but she drew a shaky strength from his unwavering presence. Cale was a tower of focus, and that focus gave her a fragment of courage she hadn't felt in days. The first blows hit the wooden barricade. The door shuddered under the repeated strikes of heavy fists and iron tools. Dust and splinters sprayed into the dim light, and Lila flinched, pressing herself against the wall. Cale's eyes narrowed, and his muscles coiled like a spring. He gripped his revolver, aiming at the first shadow as it appeared through a crack in the door. Move. He hissed to Lila, his voice low but urgent. She scrambled behind him as he fired a precise shot, the metallic report echoing through the homestead. The intruder fell, stumbling back into the dust outside. Cale did not hesitate. He moved with the fluid precision of someone who had faced death countless times, each action deliberate, every motion survival itself. More men were coming. Their shouts grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls. Cale used the barricades, the floorboards, and every ounce of his ingenuity to his advantage. Tripwires rattled, making noise that echoed like false footsteps, drawing some of the men off course. A crate tipped over and a pile of debris created a small explosion of dust, confusing the attackers. Lila, though terrified, began to feel the rhythm of their defense. She saw how Cale anticipated their movements, how his long black hair swayed with each motion, how the turquoise and bone jewelry across his chest caught the dim light, marking him like a warrior from an older, unyielding world. Something about his presence gave her hope, a certainty that even in the vast cruelty of the Old West, one person could stand against the darkness. The assault continued, relentless and brutal. Cale's revolver cracked repeatedly, each shot deliberate. Men fell, some screaming, some stumbling into traps he had prepared. His movements were a combination of raw strength and careful calculation, an instinctive dance born of necessity. Yet he never lost track of Lila. Each glance he cast toward her reminded him that his fight was not just for survival, but for someone who could not defend herself. Hours seemed to pass like minutes. The canyon swallowed the shouts and echoes of the intruders, leaving the homestead shrouded in tense silence between bursts of violence. When the final intruder broke through the window, Cale met him with a swift, brutal precision that ended the threat instantly. Finally, the dust settled. The wind whispered through the broken windows, carrying the faint cries of retreating men. Cale lowered his weapon, chest heaving, eyes scanning the room and then resting on Lila. She was trembling but alive, clutching the blanket to her chest. "You're safe," he said softly, almost more to reassure himself than her. She looked up at him, her dark eyes glistening, and for the first time she whispered a single word, "Thank you." Cale nodded, his jaw tight, but something softened in his expression. Outside, the canyon was quiet again, but the danger had not vanished, it had only paused. The homestead, battered but standing, had become a fortress of survival, and Cale knew that the coming days would demand even more cunning, courage, and sacrifice. As the sun rose fully over the canyon, painting the walls in golden light, Cale and Lila shared a moment of fragile reprieve. They had survived the night, but the war for her freedom and for their lives was far from over. The quiet after the night's battle was deceptive. Dawn had painted the canyon in gold and crimson, but the light brought no relief. Cale stood at the broken doorway, the wind tugging at his long black hair, dust clinging to his bronzed skin. His tribal jewelry glinted in the early sun, turquoise, bone, and silver catching the light like a warning to those who dared approach. Outside, the footprints of retreating men scarred the earth, leading back into the canyon, but Cale knew this was only temporary. They would return, stronger and more ruthless. Lila emerged from the cot, blanket draped over her shoulders, eyes wide and cautious. She stepped lightly, as though even the floorboards might betray her. "Will they come back?" she asked, her voice quivering, still fragile from weeks of fear and exhaustion. Cale didn't answer immediately. He scanned the horizon, muscles tensed, revolver loose in one hand. "Yes," he said finally. "And next time, it won't just be one or two men. They'll bring more. We have to move before the canyon swallows us both." Lila swallowed hard, her dark hair falling into her face. "Move? Where?" "To safety," Cale replied. His eyes softened for a brief moment. "There's a canyon trail to the north, a hidden path my father taught me as a boy. It's narrow, treacherous, but it keeps you out of sight. That's where. We'll go." Every movement Cale made was precise and deliberate. He checked the perimeter, scanning the canyon walls, listening to the wind. Every sound carried a warning. Every shadow could hide a threat. Lila followed quietly, doing as she was told, clinging to the strength radiating from him. She had begun to realize that he was more than just a warrior, he was a protector. Someone who turned fear into strategy and danger into opportunity. As they navigated the jagged trail, the canyon rose like a cathedral around them. Dust swirled in the wind, carrying the scent of sage and sun-baked earth. Cale moved ahead, alert, muscles taut, while Lila followed, keeping her gaze fixed on him. Each step was measured. Every misstep could mean a fall into the rocky abyss below. The path twisted and narrowed, forcing them into single file. The shadows of the canyon stretched long, creating shapes that seemed almost alive. Lila clutched the blanket closer, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. Cale glanced back. "Keep moving. Trust the path, trust me." Suddenly, the stillness shattered. A distant shout rose from the canyon floor, followed by the rumble of hooves. Cale's body stiffened, eyes scanning the cliffs. A gang of mounted men appeared, kicking up dust in their pursuit. They had followed them overnight, relentless, their hatred tangible even from a distance. Cale slowed, crouching behind a boulder. He whispered to Lila, "Stay down, keep quiet, and don't look back." His mind raced, calculating distances, angles, and strategies. The warriors' men who thrived on fear and violence were fast, but Cale had the advantage of terrain and knowledge. The pursuit intensified. Hooves pounded the canyon floor, echoing against the cliffs. Cale grabbed a handful of loose stones and tossed them strategically down a side path, creating a diversion. Dust and rocks tumbled, and some of the pursuers veered off course, buying precious seconds. Lila watched in awe, realizing that every move Cale made was deliberate, that he fought not with anger, but with intelligence honed over years of survival. By midday, they reached a narrow alcove hidden by a wall of jagged rocks. Cale guided Lila inside, brushing dust and sweat from her face. "This is it," he said quietly. "We rest here. From here, we can plan the next step." For the first time in days, Lila allowed herself to breathe. She realized that she had survived not only because of her own resilience, but because of Cale, his presence, his skill, and his unwavering commitment. The canyon was unforgiving, but with him, survival felt possible. Cale sat beside her, scanning the horizon even as he spoke in a low voice. "The world out there is harsh, Lila, but out here, together, we can endure it. We'll survive the next attack, and then the next. Step by step until we're free of them." The sun burned high, casting the canyon walls in gold. Dust settled and a fragile calm returned. But both of them knew that the storm was far from over. The day's light revealed beauty and danger in equal measure, and survival depended not just on strength, but on trust, courage, and the bond forming between them, one forged in the fires of desperation and danger. Cale led Lila deeper into the canyon, the jagged walls closing around them like silent guardians. The sun had climbed higher, but the narrow path kept them mostly in shadow, the heat tempered by rock overhangs and sudden gusts of wind. Dust and sand swirled around their boots, carrying the scent of sage and sun-baked earth. Each step was deliberate. Cale's eyes scanned constantly, alert to the smallest movement or sound. Behind him, Lila followed cautiously, blanket wrapped tightly, her heart pounding with every crunch of rock beneath their feet. "This way," Cale whispered, guiding her toward a narrow alcove hidden behind a natural stone barrier. The opening was small, almost imperceptible from the trail above, but Cale had used it as a refuge in his youth. "We can rest here for a while," he said. The alcove was shaded, cool, with a small pool of water trickling from a hidden spring. Lila knelt, dipping her fingers into the clear water, letting it trickle over her face. For the first time in days, she felt a measure of relief. Cale remained alert, standing near the entrance, his long black hair catching the sunlight, bronzed skin glinting, and tribal jewelry of turquoise, bone, and silver glinting as he moved. Even in a moment of pause, he was vigilance personified, a warrior whose presence alone demanded respect. He scanned the canyon floor below, noting faint signs that the men who had pursued them were regrouping. They were relentless, but Cale knew the terrain better than any outsider could. As Lila settled against the cool stone wall, she finally spoke in a whisper. "Cale, why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Cale's eyes softened briefly as he glanced at her. "I know what it's like to be hunted," he said, voice low and steady. "And I know what it's like to be helpless. I won't let them take you. Not if I can stop it." His words were firm, yet carried a weight of honesty that Lila could feel deep in her bones. The wind shifted, carrying the distant echo of hooves and voices. Cale's body stiffened, every sense on high alert. "They're close," he muttered. "I don't think they gave up." He moved to the edge of the alcove, peering down through the natural openings in the rock. Dust clouds rose in the canyon below, faint shapes moving swiftly as men searched for them. Cale's jaw tightened. He would not let them succeed. He returned to Lila, crouching beside her. "We'll have to be smart," he said. "I can hold them off, but you need to stay hidden, stay quiet. This alcove may be our only advantage for now." Lila nodded, gripping her blanket like a lifeline. She felt the tension in Cale's muscles, the quiet strength in his stance, and it gave her courage. She realized that her survival depended not only on her own resilience, but on the warrior guiding her, using every ounce of skill and knowledge honed in the unforgiving deserts and canyons of the West. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, casting beams of light into the alcove, illuminating the dust motes floating in the air. Cale's eyes never left the canyon floor. He checked his revolver, adjusted his footing, and whispered directions to Lila. "If they come this way, move toward the left side of the rocks. Don't hesitate. I'll meet you there." As the shadows shifted with the passing sun, Cale felt the familiar tension of a battle about to unfold. The men below were organized, determined, and cruel. But Cale had patience, knowledge, and an unbreakable will. And now he had Lila's trust, a fragile, precious thing that added meaning to every calculated risk he took. The first figure appeared on the canyon trail leading to the alcove, dust swirling around him. Cale's muscles tensed. This was it, the next test. The fight for survival, for freedom, for life itself was about to begin in earnest. And in the heart of the canyon, under the unyielding sun and the shadow of jagged cliffs, Cale and Lila would face it together, bound by courage, desperation, and the unspoken promise that neither would be left behind. The sun hung high above the canyon, scorching the rocky walls with relentless heat. Cale crouched at the edge of the hidden alcove, eyes scanning the trail below. The men who had pursued them for days were regrouping, their shouts carrying across the canyon like a challenge. Dust clouds rose in their wake as they moved, weapons glinting in the harsh sunlight. Every instinct Cale had honed over years of survival screamed at him. This fight would decide everything. Behind him, Lila pressed herself into the shadows of the alcove, clutching her blanket tightly. She had learned to trust Cale completely. His presence was a shield, his skill a lifeline. She could feel the tension radiating off his bronzed, muscular frame, long black hair sweeping in the wind, turquoise and bone jewelry flashing in the sun. Cale was more than a protector. He was a force of nature, precise and unstoppable. And now, in the open canyon, he would have to be. Cale motioned for her to stay low as he surveyed the trail. His eyes caught the subtle movements of the first man, calculating their approach. They were confident, sure of victory, but they underestimated the terrain and the man standing between them and their prey. Cale tightened his grip on his revolver and a small hunting knife strapped to his belt. Every muscle in his body coiled like a spring. The first attackers reached the canyon floor below. Cale moved swiftly, stepping out of the alcove and drawing their attention. He fired, precise and controlled, forcing the men to scatter and take cover behind rocks. Dust and small stones kicked up under the thunder of hooves as chaos erupted on the trail. Lila held her breath, heart hammering, but Cale's commanding presence reassured her. The men tried to flank the alcove, moving cautiously along the rocky walls, but Cale anticipated every move. He used the terrain to his advantage, rolling boulders and kicking loose stones to create obstacles. Shouts and curses echoed off the canyon walls, mixing with the sharp cracks of his revolver. One by one, the attackers faltered, disoriented by the unrelenting precision of a warrior who knew these canyons as his own body. Hours seemed to stretch as the skirmish intensified. Cale never wavered, and Lila followed his instructions perfectly, moving silently, staying hidden, ready to run if the need arose. Every moment of terror was punctuated by the warrior's unyielding focus, the way his long black hair flew around his bronzed face, the flash of turquoise and bone jewelry catching the sun as he moved with lethal grace. Finally, the last of the pursuers fled, their shouts fading into the canyon. The wind carried the sound of retreat, leaving the hidden alcove in a tense but absolute silence. Cale lowered his revolver, chest heaving, sweat and dust coating his skin. Lila emerged from the shadows, tentative at first, then steadily, until she stood beside him. "You did it," she whispered, voice trembling but filled with awe. Cale's eyes softened as he looked at her. "We did it," he said. "You trusted me. You survived. And now we're free." The canyon seemed to breathe around them, the heat and dust replaced by a sense of hard-earned calm. Lila felt the weight of days of terror lift, replaced by a fragile hope, anchored by the warrior who had guided her through danger, fear, and desperation. Cale surveyed the cliffs one last time, ensuring the threat was gone. His duty had been fulfilled, but more than that, a bond had formed, an unspoken promise of protection, trust, and survival. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the canyon walls in molten gold and crimson, Cale and Lila moved together along the hidden trail. The journey ahead was uncertain, the desert harsh and unrelenting, but the terror that had shadowed them for days had ended. They had survived. They had endured. And in the unforgiving expanse of the Old West, that was victory enough. For the Kaz of enough. First time in weeks, Lila allowed herself a smile. Cale's eyes caught hers, and he gave a rare, fleeting nod of approval. In the heart of the canyon, surrounded by the rugged beauty of the desert, two souls had emerged from fear and pursuit, stronger, unbroken, and free. The wind carried their steps forward, dust swirling at their boots, and in that moment, the canyon seemed to hold its breath in reverence for the warrior, the survivor, and the enduring spirit that had refused to be defeated.